So by popular demand, as Paul Weller once said, the public gets what the public wants, and they wanted comments on what is officially now known as the Toronto debacle, because here on 4020 Not Live, it is Monday, the 20th of July, and Super League, for the first time ever, is an 11-team competition. Phil Kaplan of 4020 magazine is here. Fake news journalist, as some will describe him, John Davidson. We don't think he is. We think he tells the truth. He's also here again because if you haven't heard the news already, Toronto have pulled out of Super League for the 2020 season. Plans are in tatters now for Project Restart, or whatever Robert Elson was calling it. John, on the programme last week, you spoke about the breaking news coming out of Toronto about delays in players' wages and such. And now, here we are, a week later, and they've gone for the year at least.
Yeah, it's very sad. Disappointing. It's sad. It's embarrassing for the sport, for the competition. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say. It's not good for the players, obviously, who are owed money. It's very sad for the fans. They've got some really loyal and committed fans. Some of them who I've met, and they seem like lovely people. Other ones who continually slagging me off, but there you go. But yeah, I think I've probably said this over and over again, or anyone who follows me on Twitter can see there have been warning signs with the visas last year and with paying bills late or lawsuits about not paying bills. So there's been some issues there before, and obviously the coronavirus has exacerbated the issue.
Phil, we like expansion. We like exciting new things. Toronto have been, in many ways, a breath of fresh air to the sport since their introduction under Eric Perez. Lots of changes over the years. A big signing this year in Sonny Bill Williams. Big statement of intent. Fair to say, on the field this year, it's not quite worked out for them so far.
I think like everything in rugby league, there's never a simple black or white answer to any of this. It raises far more questions than it answers. I think you need to look at, have Toronto made a contribution? Then you need to look at, where does the competition go from here? And I'm really not sure the answer is Featherstone offering to take their place at short notice, with the greatest respect to the people down at what was Post Office Road. I think it's also about a wider debate of sport is going to change because of the coronavirus situation. Is this the first step of rugby league being forced into looking at things like expansion and what that actually means going forward? I think the final thing is, and the saddest thing perhaps, is there going to be a Toronto at the end of all this? And I think if you go right back to the beginning, to the first of those questions, what have they bought? Well, firstly, they've taken nothing out of the sport. So when people say resource has been diverted, it hasn't. It hasn't cost the sport a single penny to have Toronto in there. Allied to that, they've brought in an investor who wasn't involved in rugby league, who's put anything up to £20 million of his own money into a project that he could see potential for. There've also been 10,000 fans attracted to the sport who 3 years ago didn't know that sport existed. I don't see negatives in too much of that. I was told on a number of occasions by various different people that the model with which they had to operate meant that they were set up to fail. And I think that raises serious questions about the governance of the sport, not any particular person or body, but how can you have a sport where the other people who run clubs in the same division have a say on who is in and under what terms they're in? And when the argument comes back, well, they signed up, they knew what they were into. I think we've been saying on this programme for 3 years that it's not beyond the realms of possibility that at some point they are going to be in Super League. The dynamics of what they signed up to at the beginning changed from both parties. It is not an equitable competition that expects 1 of 12 to be self-funded. You then take this into the coronavirus situation and you say, well, They've no access to the £16 million that's been negotiated. They've no access to furlough payments because they're deemed to be a foreign club when it suits the game for them to be deemed as a foreign club. They're now the only club who are not going to have any home matches. And that was the possibility in their budgets of 11 games at home with arguably 10,000 people at each of those games and all the ancillary income that comes with that. So you can make a case for the fact that this was an accident waiting to happen. And I just think it's very, very sad for the sport. In the short term, I genuinely don't know what the answer is of playing with 11 teams. In the longer term, I really do fear for the fact that if I was David Argyle, who clearly has made some mistakes and has undermined players and creditors with late payments and other things that horrible journalists have pointed out, what does the sport do if there is no Toronto? What is the point of bringing Ottawa in? What do we really feel about having Catalan in the competition? It's another in a long road of rugby league trying to decide what it wants to be and how it wants to be perceived. And I'm not sure, again, at the end of this long explanatory rant that tells us nothing, that merely people glorying in the fact that we should now divert resources back into what they call the heartland is the answer, because no resources have been taken out of the sport to date. They've only been put in.
We'll talk about the situation with Toronto first. Now we'll look at the rest of the season because we're just speculating wildly. But Phil mentioned there, John, about them being set up to fail in a sense. They had to start in League One by building a championship squad. They then went into the championship and built a pretty much bottom end of Super League squad. Eventually got promoted. Now they're in Super League and obviously haven't had the best of season on the field. Was that a waste of 3 years? And I know sport people like promotion and relegation, or like it to be done on merit and not teams parachuted in. And I've still seen today people saying Toronto were parachuted into Super League, which is a ridiculous thing to say because it's patently not true. But having had 3 years pretty much I don't want to say wasting money, but it almost is, to get to where they've wanted to be all along, were they, as Phil says, set up to fail?
I think there's some merit in that, in what Phil's saying, because you could look at the conditions that they came in. Obviously, they did agree to those conditions. Maybe they had to. Maybe that was the only way they were going to get in. But, no distribution. I think they thought that they were going to get a Canadian or a North American TV deal, but that's just not materialised, and maybe, that's quite unrealistic. But, yeah, the conditions aren't great. But also, as Phil mentioned, they haven't helped themselves with, the spend on some of the players. They've paid massive overs. They've had lots of issues with paying. They've bought players from other clubs and then not paid those clubs for 12 months, or, owners have had to go on Twitter and demand the money, or they've had legal action. So in terms of goodwill from other clubs, they've not helped themselves there. So when they then go back and say, look, Super League, we need Sky money, the other clubs are not going to sort of run to their help, are they? I think, and I've spoken to a few people about this, and I've written about this as well, if we're going to, and I'm not against expansion, if we're going to expand, let's do it properly. Let's have a strategy for North America that says, okay, we want a club in Toronto, we want one in Ottawa, we want one in New York, wherever. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to allocate this money. We're going to, help you by, you can have a little bit of salary cap expansion, whatever you do. I mean, you look at, I think Mr. Bennett has joined us. You look at other sports, how the Melbourne Storm was set up in Australia. I think News Limited spent something like 40 million quid over 20 years to get them going. In the AFL, they've spent upwards of 30 to 40 million pounds on new clubs in Western Sydney and the Gold Coast. You have to not only throw money, but you have to have a strategy to support it. And there really hasn't been a strategy around Toronto. And on top of that, some bad decisions and bad financial management has led to the situation we're in now. And it is a shame because they have, as Phil said, they've brought a lot of positives. They have converted new fans. There's been a lot of good PR, which is, being justified, and a lot of publicity. But sort of underneath it, there has been an undercurrent of issues that have been ignored or just put aside for so long. And we've never had a report or a look into why the Crusaders failed, why Gateshead failed, why Paris failed, and we really should do that, because if we just keep repeating the same mistakes, then what is the end game?
I also think that when we invited Catalan in, who most people seem to think have been a benefit for the sport, admittedly, that's an area where rugby league was already known, and it was grafting onto a support base that was already there, that they were given a 3-year moratorium on relegation, and they were given a share of the finances of the competition in the top flight. You know, to do that under one regime in the centre and not under another, I think tells you that we just never take expansion seriously enough. The contract that the Wolfpack signed to get in the first place was the most onerous placed on any club who's ever come into a competition. Now, the fact that they signed that is down to them. They didn't have to. But I think it was obvious that should they get to Super League, that would have to be renegotiated in some way or form. And you could see them getting to Super League 3 years before it happened. So we wait until they're there, and then we say, right, you know, we need to look at the terms and conditions. They want some share. I don't get that. I think you either want a team in your competition, you make them welcome, or you don't.
It's almost like a live broadcasting, because Paul Bennett has joined us. Asked him before, about 5 minutes before he came on, do you want to come on? And he said yes, so here he is. 4020 magazine columnist, soon to be back in the editor's chair with one of those visors on like they have in all the 1950s film noir, editor of League Weekly.
Yeah, I do wear one of those, by the way.
Well, I'd be very disappointed if you didn't. What is your initial reaction, Paul, to the excitement of Toronto pulling out of the 2020 Super League season?
Another quiet week, okay. Really, I mean, surprised. I didn't see that coming. Obviously, there had been serious issues, which I'm sure you've already covered in the last few minutes with the visa problem. It started to look like there were going to be serious issues in terms of getting a team out there, certainly a competitive team for the rest of the season. But I didn't expect them to withdraw. I do wonder whether, in some ways, it is a reaction to at least a perceived lack of support from Super League from Toronto's part, whether they feel like they have received so little support in their view that they felt, well, you know what, we're not going to spend money on doing this without the support. We're going to pull out and leave you short. And this is the best way to protect the business going forward. I don't know whether it seems like the nuclear option to just pull out, and they feel, I mean, it feels like they've decided that they've little option but to take it. I mean, it's still very raw at the moment. It's hard to know exactly what to make of this all right now. It's just I didn't expect this. Of all the things to happen, I didn't expect a withdrawal from the competition. You know, while still saying, you know, we haven't gone bust, the club still exists. It's we're not playing.
Just to interject on what Paul said, I mean, there is quite a bit of speculation that that David Argyle will pull out in November at the end of this year. Not confirmed, obviously. And I think Ross Heppenstall's done an interview with David Argyle that'll be in the Eye tomorrow, talking about the future of the club. But yeah, it's obviously not. It doesn't look good.
I think the timing is everything. You know, when they weren't getting anywhere on the visa issues with the backing that they felt they needed from the governing body, you know, that went public, and Super League had to issue a statement saying this is all a little bit inconvenient. I think, you know, there's been no announcement on what's happening with relegation. There's been turning down of income when we were saying that obviously they're the only club that not only doesn't have a share of the central income but has no access to the money that the game has, you know, pot that it's got to dip into. I think this timing is absolutely deliberate by Toronto to cause maximum impact. It's just not a great look for Super League. We haven't had any promotion at all for the competition restarting in 2 weeks. You wouldn't know if you weren't a rugby league fan. And now we're going to have endless speculation about the only transatlantic team. Is its demise imminent? And there clearly are going to be victims of COVID. I just think it's very, very hard for the sport to make a case when a new television deal is due in a year's time that it's progressive and forward-looking if one of the main elements it had that gave it that look isn't going to be there, or potentially isn't going to be there.
And with all due respect to James Maloney, who's a great player, obviously, he was going to be the big signing until Sonny Bill Williams turned up at the start of this season, Paul. And Sonny Bill Williams is a worldwide sporting name. And I guess now he may be lost to Rugby League again.
Yeah, well, it would appear so. I don't think anyone else is going to pay him that sort of money, are they? Yeah, I mean, you talk about James Maloney there, and to us, he was a huge signing, because we're all Rugby League fans. But to anyone outside the game, I don't think James Maloney means anything to anyone that isn't a Rugby League fan, does he? With all due respect to him, Sonny Bill Williams does. That was something unique that Toronto brought. For all the stresses and the complications and the logistical nightmares that they brought with them, that was an undeniable, tangible thing that they brought to us that we could use to sell the game. And you do wonder whether without them we can come up with those sort of pulls to get the sort of people, the new audiences in that we need to if we're going to get that broadcast deal that Phil rightly mentioned.
But the question, Paul's got to be, was it smart to sign him if you can't afford to pay him?
Well, I mean, the problem is now, I mean, it's difficult to say and address any of those issues in this current context, because that was a pre-pandemic world. And it might well be that without the pandemic, we know we're well versed on the issues that they've had with paying people, John. I mean, you've been at the forefront of that. We've done a lot of stories on it in League Weekly, but it might be that without this pandemic, they and obviously they're clearly not in this situation, but that they bring some value and he brings some value. We'll never know that now. I don't think, but. Was it? I mean, you could always argue, you could have spent that money on so many other players, and they would have had some players to play right now, so they wouldn't be in this mess, sure. But would they have achieved the other things off the field that they wanted to achieve? Would Super League have got the same value out of that? No. Sonny Bill Williams to Super League was worth 1,000 Toronto players, and never mind another 5. So yeah, I mean, it's easy to judge them on that, and it's a fair point, but it's almost a separate issue to me, I think.
I mean, when was the last time we had a press conference at Arsenal that was attended by the world's media? It was the signing of Sonny Bill Williams. Now, whether he was the same player that perhaps they thought they were signing, time would have told us on that. And I'm with Paul on this. I think that you do have to speculate to accumulate, and I'm really not sure that we can, take too much of a view on who they signed. I think their raison d'etre for signing the people they did was to raise the profile of the sport in an unfamiliar country. And I think to do that, there's always going to be collateral damage with who else you can pay and what your finances look like. I think they gambled on behalf of the competition to bring somebody of that name in. I think they did with Callum Watkins, and obviously I'm feeling for him tonight because he may well never now pull on that shirt. There are other players that are clearly linked with them. John Wilkin will probably retire on the back of this news, I suspect. There's lots of implications that are at a very personal level. I just think the wider issue is, when is Rugby League going to be realistic about what it wants to be and how it wants to get to where it thinks it needs to be, and what sort of strategies it needs to employ to get there. And this is a classic example of, we're not going to micromanage the sport. And actually, sometimes you do need to, if you want to be something that you're currently not. And it's the latest in a long line of failures of expansion that is partly down to the game and not the people that want to invest in the game.
feel sorry for Callum Watkins, but also the person who bought Callum Watkins' game-worn shirt in those auctions Toronto ran a few weeks ago, to be facetious. We mentioned recruitment, John, and I think it's safe to say, obviously they were very light on players at the start of the season, but the players they had as well, they had some very good players, as my Toronto shirt in the background falls off.
It's a metaphor.
It must be. They signed some obviously very talented players, but a lot of that squad obviously not up to scratch.
Yeah, I mean, I fully understand the publicity and the branding exercise in signing Sonny Bill Williams, but if you know you can't, pay your players on time, it doesn't seem like an overall smart strategy. And obviously they've been paying overs for a lot of players for a long time, and that's kind of come to bite them on the arse in Super League, as we saw at the start of the season. And I think not having a reserve grade or academy has also contributed to that, because there isn't any young players coming through that they can blood. They literally only have a first team, while every other club in the country has either an academy or a reserve team to draw on. So that's another problem. Obviously, that costs money, but you think that may be a smarter investment than paying an Australian forward an extra $100,000 that he's not going to get elsewhere. I think there's little mistakes that have been made that have, probably been combined and led to bigger issues. But as Phil said, it is very sad, the whole episode. If John Wilkin finishes his career, there's lots of players there who are owed a lot of money. There's been assurances that they'll get paid. I hope that's the case. But there's other companies who are chasing Toronto for money that have worked for the club in the last 3 years that have not gone public. They've approached me, but they don't want to go on the record that are owed money as well. So it's not a clear-cut issue, and it hasn't been for a long time.
Paul,
I've just realised that my camera isn't on. I'll let you have a vote between the three of you whether you're actually.
No.
I'd say I haven't eaten yet, and it might put me off.
John just had soup, which was the pre-match entertainment we had. So it's completely up to you, Paul. I mean, I can just stick a picture of
demand, just because you didn't want me.
Oh, look at that.
Am I on there now?
You are here.
I can show this was not set up either. Just right next to me is a Toronto Wolfpack cap. So if I need to put that on at any point.
Cheerleader.
This could be worth something, I suppose, if they.
I've still got the scarf I was given by a prominent member of Toronto Wolfpack front office, as they would say, at the launch of the championship last season. So I'm sure she'll put that somewhere.
I would just pose to all three of you. Toronto's finances clearly are not on a stable footing, but are they any worse at the moment than the majority of clubs in just not rugby league but sport as a whole? Should we be making allowances for them at this time, or is it such an ingrained issue that this was an accident just waiting to happen?
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because we never got to see how logistically difficult it was going to be for Toronto to be sustainable in Super League in normal circumstances, and those normal circumstances lasted a month, and it might have been difficult, but it might have been surmountable. We don't know now. If we could somehow get them through to normality, we could try that. I mean, whether normality is ever going to return, I don't know right now. It just feels like not. It's difficult to say, because it's quite possible, Phil, that it never was possible. It never was feasible. But we don't know that. And I don't think you can be wise after the event now and say, oh, it was never going to work. Or this just shows up how ridiculous it was, because the circumstances completely changed and nobody saw this coming whatsoever. And so do you now, in this post-COVID world, just decide to shrink everything to a point whereby if this happens again, well we're okay? Do you think that negatively going forward? I don't know.
You think it may well have put the NFL's plans for a London franchise back, which seems to get talked about, so on and so on. And obviously, when the World League of American Football was a thing in the early 90s, that transatlantic division only lasted a few years before contracting into Europe. Kent, Mansfield, Sheffield. Well, Sheffield is still here somehow. Fulham, they're still here somehow. There has to be a plan, doesn't there, for expansion? And well, there you go. Crusaders, the obvious example. Very much like Toronto, made their way up through the divisions, got to the top division, and imploded. And as John, as you referred to, there have been plenty of companies, or plenty is the wrong word because I don't know how many, but there have been companies who said they haven't been paid on time. Clubs as well. As Paul said, we should judge everyone by this new situation, but as happened with Toronto, it happened before, John.
Well, what I would say just before John comes in on that is that just because the business was badly run doesn't make it necessarily a bad business, if you know what I'm saying. They were clearly, from all the reports that we've heard from John over the last couple of years, some bad management at that club, and it's gone about its business poorly in many respects. But it doesn't necessarily mean that actually the business isn't sound and is a bad business and is a flawed one. It could just be administratively it's been done very badly, but there could still be a business there. It's harder to see that now in the current circumstances, but I think that's an important distinction to make.
What about reputational damage to Super League? We're on the verge of Project Restart, however that's going to look. If Toronto are not there and don't return, then what does that mean for Super League as a competition? That again, we're entering now the 26th year, and yet another expansion team has fallen by the wayside. It is the latest Paris, it is the latest Gateshead, it is the latest Crusaders in its various formats. It is the latest London in that they're not in Super League. We all sat there. I know you were a lot younger, Paul, probably still at school, when Maurice Lindsay said, this is the mapping that Super League is setting out to do, and we are going to be playing games in the European capitals. And we've never looked more isolated going back now as we're going to if Toronto aren't there.
Yeah, sorry, John. I'm gonna steal from you.
I was just going to say, I think Phil, part of the issue that I see is as a sport is we need to walk before we can run. We all want to be a global sport and played in the big, but we have to be realistic. Can't go from A to Z in one club in Canada or whatever. Ian Roberts was going to be the face in China of rugby league. We were going to play in Super League. We were going to have clubs in China in the 90s. Did that happen? No. we need to live in the real world, and I think small growth, strategic growth, well planned, well executed should be the aim. And you mentioned London, and I think I'm a fan of the London Broncos. But then you could call them extension club, but rugby league's been played in the capital since 1900 something, and the Broncos in one form or another have been around for 40 years, but they only get 1,500 fans. So we need to come up with a way where we can grow the game sustainably and sensibly, because I think episodes like we've seen with Toronto just make us look amateur and small time and just hurt the overall image of the sport.
I think on the look to the sport outside, I think we can get away with this one because it's pandemic. We can say, well, this is why it failed, whilst inwardly knowing that it might have failed anyway because of our track record. But also, I've completely lost my train of thought there, to be honest. John's put me off. Sorry, John.
Well, I will ask you something, Paul, because obviously anything in newspaper, you get loads of letters into the letters page, and I've seen it all on the 4020.news pages on Facebook today. Plenty of people gloating about Toronto's success. There are plenty of people in the sport, supporters of the sport, rugby league family members, who've wanted them to fail from day one.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate, to be honest. Yeah, and probably some owners as well. You might mix into that. I don't know. I guess I remembered my other point. It was so that I forgot it for a second there. But if it's the reality check that we needed in terms of coming to terms with what rugby league is and what it should be, and what it is best focusing on, then the timing is dreadful, isn't it? With Ottawa coming in next year, so it could have come a bit sooner before we'd admit them, because now you do wonder, well, how do we approach that project? And I don't know. It's the simple answer to that. I have no idea. It's going to be interesting to watch now how that club handles itself, especially when they've just announced Laurent Fraser-New and are trying to get some positive publicity for themselves. That doesn't help them, does it?
I think just on Ottawa, I think it's an important distinction to make that they quite smartly, and maybe because Eric Perez sort of knew the conditions that he went and bought Hamel, so he's bought a in the RFL, so he gets central distribution. So they'll get whatever it is next year in League One, 40 grand, and then more in the Championship. And if they get the Super League, they'll get a 12th of the share. And I also suspect they won't be signing any Australian or Kiwi players because they'll be based in the UK for much of the year, much like Toronto, and they won't have that visa problem if they don't go and sign Antipodeans. If they have a team full of Englishmen, then they're not going to need work permits, are they, to play in England?
No, but it will still meet with the same opposition and the same counterpoints about whether they should be in anyway and whether we should be expanding. They'll still face those opinions. Yeah. And to what Richard was saying, there was many people probably celebrating what's happened to Toronto now. Those people will be out for Ottawa as well. So
I think you go back to the very beginning of why did we bring Toronto in the first place and give them such a restrictive deal? And I think that tells you everything about our attitude to expansion, that nobody wants to take responsibility for it or allocate resource for it to do it properly. And I wasn't party to the meeting, and I think it's important to clearly mention as well that Eric Perez was the one who agreed to the deal that has hamstrung the Wolfpack. So it's not a surprise that he didn't agree to that same deal with Ottawa. But the fact is that if you invite somebody to your party, but you don't want to give them any birthday cake at the end of the day, you don't want them to play in the pass the parcel game, you expect them to bring presents for everybody, but not take anything away themselves. You are not true expansionists. I don't see the logic behind inviting them in the first place under those conditions. If after the course of 3 years, you've done it because you want the person who is in charge to prove that he is committed, and he's put in £20 million and taken nothing out of it, if that is indeed the figure, but it's rumoured to be something in the realm of that. If you see that their commitment to promoting the competition has been to sign the kind of players that has given the competition a profile that it didn't otherwise have through clubs that have been there for 125 years, if you also acknowledge that not paying your creditors on time is not unique to that business, it is part of virtually everybody's business at the moment, be that another Super League team or anybody who's trying to combat the current economic conditions that we live in, then I just think you don't have a commitment to expansion, and that the history of the sport would bear that out. So it goes right back to the very beginning. If you're going to impose those conditions, then are you a sport that wants to stay where you are, in which case acknowledge the fact that you will always be a big minority, geographically restricted sport? There may be nothing wrong with that. The likelihood is you're going to have to be part-time if you're going to go down that road. Or if you seriously are going to say the roots of our sport have been undermined by economic factors that are beyond our control, so we need to grow new arms to the business, then you have to be more proactive than we've been with Toronto. You have to go back to the table. You have to renegotiate. You have to make them feel part of the family. I don't think when they got into Super League, it became obvious they were getting into Super League. We decided that we needed to change the way we work with them so that they could bring more to the party rather than feel outcast right from the very beginning.
Simple question, which I'll ask to all three of you. I'll start with John. Super League 2021, are Toronto Wolfpack in it?
I would guess probably not in the current situation, but in rugby league and when you're dealing with the RFL and Super League, you never know what decisions going to come. So, yeah, I'm not making any bold predictions.
Yeah, I would like to think that they will be, but I do tend to be a little bit less optimistic than that. I'm not feeling it right now. But yeah, I would like us to be able to get through it and be able to welcome them back next season without saying, well, you pulled out and therefore you are subject therefore to a punishment, whether it's deductions or relegation automatically or whatever. I think we have to take these unique circumstances and try and make the best of it. And the best of it for me is to get them back in next year. But do I think that'll happen? Probably not. Probably siding with John on that.
I think there's two issues. One is, will Toronto be there? In which case, if they're not, then any debate about them being in Super League or anywhere else is irrelevant. And my worry at the moment is that if I was David Argyle, whose business and accumulation of personal wealth will clearly have been affected by the environment that we're in at the moment, because I don't know anybody who hasn't been affected by it. Even if he's drawing money from the mining industry, it's suffering. Everything's suffering. So I think the first question is, will there be a Toronto? I have a horrible feeling there might not be. The question then becomes, morally, if there is a Toronto, do you keep their place in Super League open, or do they have to start again at the bottom? If they have to start again at the bottom, and I was Toronto, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't go through that process again of investing a lot of money to get back to the point where you are at the moment. But the other thing that I think is, is this again a problem of the fact that we didn't make a decision soon enough on promotion and relegation? That if we'd have ring-fenced the 2020 season and said, as Paul has quite rightly pointed out, these circumstances are exceptional. We need to make some exceptional decisions, and people need to accept that nobody comes out of this without taking a hit. So whether or not we get the Championship or League One back, we are not going to have promotion relegation from Super League. Then I don't know whether Toronto would have been in a better position to ride this out if they knew they couldn't get relegated. While everything was still up in the air, it becomes a different scenario. Is that something that we can throw at the door of the sport and say, you just needed to make a decision earlier that meant that Hull KR and Toronto and whoever felt safe in continuing their investment at this time, because they weren't going to plough money into a situation that ultimately at the end of November they were going to be told they were in a different division?
What happens with the Challenge Cup now? Because Toronto was supposed to be playing Newcastle in that, and the Challenge Cup is back. That was announced last week. Although we don't actually know what's going to happen with the teams from the Championship or below Super League rather, and how they're going to take part, because they're not playing at the moment, are they? So how do they resume? How do those ties? Because I was looking forward to Wakefield versus Featherstone.
And I was wondering, from a perspective of prize money with the Challenge Cup, could Newcastle Thunder argue that they're going to be in the next round now? So say, actually, yeah, we are going to continue, and then get through to the next round, and then get the better prize money for having qualified for the next round, and then say, actually, no, we can't play. That would seem like a smart thing for them to do. I don't know if they're watching, but maybe that's what I'd be doing right now. I'm saying, yeah, we are going to play. We intend to play. And then maybe a little bit closer to the time say, oh, actually, things have got a bit worse. But we'll take that prize money. I can't imagine that the other teams will play on. If there's going to be no Championship or League One, I know there's been suggestion that there's going to be a specifically created Championship League One competition that will, give you something to play for, but that doesn't seem like it's going to be in the time frame that would allow to compete in the Challenge Cup, and I don't see that there's much value in those clubs competing right now. So I don't think they will. I don't know. I mean, I've not been following it as closely as you guys. I don't think, because I've been still in my reality bunker on furlough playing The Last of Us 2. So you might know me better than me, but I get the sense that they're not going to take part.
I don't think they're going to come back just to play in the Challenge Cup, because the cost of coming off furlough early is probably greater than any prize money that they may get by getting into another round of the competition. So it's chicken and egg. We've announced a competition whereby they are part of it, but we haven't yet decided when they come back into playing competition. I also have another issue with this, that I haven't really taken too much notice of the fixtures, even though they were announced last week, until the Challenge Cup was added into it. And there's a massive contradiction going on here again. And I understand economics is the driver for everything at the moment. And of course it has to be. But we are going to be asking players who get to the Challenge Cup final to be playing the most ridiculous number of games in a short period of time that blows out the water any conception we have that we care about player welfare. That I get football, that they were coming to the end of their season, that to play 3 games a week over a short period of time to get some kind of a climax to their season almost made sense. I get the NRL, that they've shortened the number of games, but they're still only playing once a week. The quality is relatively high. The interest is there. I do not understand how we can genuinely expect some of our players to have to play the equivalent of a game every 3 days over an extended period of time. And at the same time, as we said, we weren't going to play an Easter Monday game this year because we were concerned about the effect it had on players. There just are too many contradictions here for me at the moment. And I genuinely, again, we don't know if we're going to be playing the Challenge Cup final in front of an audience or not. I don't see how you can if there's nobody in the stadium, even if it's on the BBC.
No. Do you think the removal of relegation probably helps on that front, though? Because I suppose if you're down the bottom half of the Super League, and you've got so many games in such little period of time, you might now be more inclined actually to rotate your squad, and so actually you can use more players and give players a rest whereby you couldn't have done that previously.
100%. But I also think it relates back to what we've been saying about Toronto. Toronto could have taken Championship players on loan. They could have taken a player from each of the Super League clubs. That we wouldn't have had some of the stars playing for them whilst the visa issues were sorted out. But they could have completed their fixtures if they knew they weren't going to get relegated. I think this is another issue whereby hindsight is a wonderful thing. But this is Toronto putting pressure on whoever is making these decisions to say, because you haven't made them, because you didn't help us out with the visa situation, which they still feel was not of their making, that it's how they're classified as a team, what country they're based in, as opposed to what visas they can get. I think all of this is basically to say, do you want us or not? How do we make a contribution to your competition, bearing in mind that we're paying for everything? If you'd have told us 2 weeks ago that we could not be relegated, we could possibly have found a way around this, bearing in mind that they are the only club who cannot play home games this year. Imagine St Helens being told that they can stay in the competition but they can't play any games at home. From an economic perspective, there wouldn't be a St Helens. You just couldn't do it. Because the first thing you'd have to do is refund all your season ticket holders because you don't have any home games. I think we have an unrealistic expectation of how clubs like Toronto can carry on in this world that we currently exist in. And we should have ring-fenced 2020 earlier, and we should have made decisions about 2020 that enabled all clubs to be able to plan for 2021, which is a much, much bigger year for the sport.
Can't wait for the next set of fixtures to come out from Super League now. They're going to have to change things around, I guess. But it seems, John, that, have all the teams now agreed wage cuts or whatever with the players, or we still got 1 or 2 stragglers left?
That's a good question, Rich. I'm not 100% sure. I think there might be. I think it was maybe Castleford today, but I have started up back training. I mean, we've got 2 weeks now, haven't we, till the start of the season? So 2 weeks training is not a lot of time to be ready to go. So, I'm not exactly sure where that is, but obviously we want to see as many teams as possible back on the field and ready to go.
Yeah, my understanding was that it was 10 that have agreed now, although that might have changed since I last looked at Twitter. And of course,
Toronto were ones who had reportedly agreed, but I don't think necessarily they had agreed.
But again, we're asking players to take wage cuts at a time when we're increasing their workload. There's something again, I understand why clubs have to do it to survive. But again, because it's exceptional circumstances, I think that's why you've got to make the big decisions first. You can't expect people to sign up to things until they know what the longer term implications of what they're signing up to. To me, we've got a little bit of this the wrong way around, and the Toronto fallout, which may have happened anyway, with John quite rightly highlighting the issue of playing suppliers and players late. It might have been easier if they knew they were guaranteed a place in Super League next year. I think it just makes it impossible as a business to plan. I think, the retail trade at the moment, Christmas is such an important time in the retail trade. Nobody can plan for it at the moment. They don't know what the market's going to look like, but they still want to stay in business to give it an option. But the longer you go without any degree of certainty, the harder it is to keep going.
I wonder what happens to the Toronto supporters, the ones based in Canada, not the ones over here who've had a brief love affair, it appears, with rugby league. How do we keep them involved in the game when they don't have a home team this year? We hope they will have one next year. They are passionate, as much as people wants to have a go at, their cardboard, they're just there for the beer garden or whatever. They are paying to go watch a sport which is or was completely alien to them, John. How do we try and keep them involved in the sport? Yeah,
that's a good question. I mean, it's a very rugby league story, isn't it? You kind of use the hashtag Peak Rugby League because this is, it's got Crusaders, it's got Gateshead Thunder, it's got Adelaide Rams, Hunter Mariners all over it. We've all followed the game probably since our early days, and this sort of stuff keeps happening. And the soap opera of rugby league never fails to disappoint. There really are some very passionate Toronto fans, some that I've met, and they do a lot of good work in the community there. So hopefully there can be a way that they can be kept in the sport, whether it's Ottawa, whether it's Toronto. Hopefully they do continue to exist, whether it be the Championship or League One or Super League with a penalty. Because they've definitely put a stake in that market. And as Phil said, maybe we should have supported them better. Like for example, the RFL could have paid for 2 development officers to be based over there, or set up like an academy to try and bring through, because I don't think there's a lot of development work done there. That could have been something that would have helped them. But yeah, there are some very good people associated with the club, and I hope they're not lost to the sport. Because let's face it, Paul, we are a sport who can't afford to lose people following us.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. We need more, not fewer. You can only retain them by giving them some clarity, I think, and doing it as soon as possible. And obviously now it seems that Toronto won't be playing this year, but they need to know as soon as possible whether Toronto's going to be around next year. And we don't know David Argyle's intentions. I know what you mentioned earlier, John, about what he might do. But Super League and the RFL need to be talking with Toronto now to sort this as soon as possible, in a much quicker way than they've done with the whole promotion and relegation business, so that we can actually say to our Canadian fans, you know what, this was just a ridiculous situation that we've had to deal with, and it was just completely unforeseen. But the club is important to us. You are important to us. I don't think we retain them by saying, oh, well, you've had a glimpse, but here, just watch it on Sky, or, your equivalent, watch Wigan play St Helens, because they're not going to have that same stake of investment. They might think, yeah, it's a great game, but they're not going to care to the extent of having their own team. And they came out in numbers. However, you might want to be skeptical about it, of how many got in for free or whatever. People turned up. That was the main thing. People were interested and turned up. So we've got to make sure that we can't let that go to waste, but we will, unless we safeguard Toronto quickly. It's. I don't think you just say to them, "Oh, go and support Ottawa." I mean, why would you? If you were them, I just feel like you would think, "Well, what's the point?" Because this is just going to happen again.
If the close, they're gone. I think that let's be realistic about this, and this is the damage that's been caused by the situation that we're in at the moment. Whoever's fault it is, that'll come out in time. But they are gone. Those 10,000 people are gone. We had nearly 20,000 people at a test match in Denver. I guarantee virtually every one of those people now have forgotten the rugby league experience they had. They may have enjoyed it. They may have gone for a few beers and bought a T-shirt. But we haven't been back there for what, 2-3 years now. You can't build up and then drop a market and expect it to stay with you. We are a very, very transient world at the moment. Toronto is a city that has, 5 other professional sports teams. If we're not there with some promise of them being in the Super League, playing in the top flight against clubs they haven't even had the chance to see them play against at home, those 10,000 people are gone. And I just don't think as a sport that there is any area within our traditional geographical spread that will suddenly bring you 10,000 fans to the party. We need to decide what we want. Toronto had announced in the not too distant past that they'd done a deal with the Department of Trade. We can't get into government departments. They were going to be the public face of companies that trade in the UK and Canada. There were all sorts of commercial opportunities that we have never had the chance to exploit. Now, that's not of our making in terms of COVID, but we have the chance now to, as Paul said, decide what we want from Toronto as a market. If we don't make that decision quickly, if they are not going to be in Super League in 2021 with a backer of the magnitude of David Argyle, possibly with a renegotiated deal where they get some funding to help them because they are in a new market. If they don't get some kind of dispensation that Catalan did about not being relegated for a certain period of time to enable them to grow their business, we have just thrown away a new market, and we do it all the time. And it's not a surprise. It's about our policy for expansion. And if we do it half-heartedly and we don't back it, then all we do is build up an expectation and we lose it, and we won't get it back.
I'm going to say the frustration in your voice, Phil, because you've seen this so many times. The final line of the Super League RFL statement today says a discussion around the longer-term consequences and the future of the Wolfpack in Super League will commence shortly. That word consequences is a very interesting choice. And
I think that word's used deliberately in the same way sanction was used against Leeds not going to Catalan. I think that is, we are not going to have a club tell us what they will and won't do. We're a governing body that will tell them what they will and won't do. So I think that's worded in shock and disbelief more than anything. I just think now is the time. We've all said it over the last few weeks when we've been doing podcasts. The world will change. The sporting world will change. Some clubs will be worse affected than others, but the sport now needs to sit down, if it hasn't already, and decide what it wants to be, what it wants to look like. A week ago, we were having Phil Gould telling us how great it was that the Super League had a toe in the North American market. Today, that toe got cut off. We need to decide as a sport whether it includes people like the NRL, whether it includes other investors that David Argyle may have been able to bring to the party. What do we want? How do we want to make that sport look in 5 years? How do we go back to Sky, having lost this golden opportunity? The amount of good work that they got out of Sonny Bill being part of it, being able to focus on Toronto when the season opened, the story that rugby league was this progressive, forward-looking sport. All of that has gone. Now, do we want to get that back? Why would we want to get that back? How do we make sure that if we do get that back, or there's somebody else coming into interview who might want to take on that mantle, be that Ottawa, Newcastle, whoever, what assurances will they have in the future? This is a sport that genuinely does want to be living up to the words that it says, but without actually the material advantage that goes with it. I don't know. I think we've had so many opportunities. This could be the last one, and it could be a catastrophic blow for the sport.
Yeah, I think it's fine to concentrate on your core audience and your traditional heartlands, as long as you're honest about it. And I think that's something Phil touched on earlier. I think a lot of this will come down to, these extraordinary times. People will look at the balance sheets and thinking more about away supporters, and the amount of people watching on Sky TV in England. Yeah, Toronto get us 10,000 fans that we wouldn't get elsewhere, but they don't get as any Sky subscribers. And I suppose if you're going to Sky right now, you are trying to bring as many subscribers from England as you can possibly offer. I think ultimately it'll probably come down to those sort of things, and the way that business will contract and become more desperate and become more, I guess, looking at the more tangible things, such as people coming through turnstiles when that's allowed again, and people buying pies and drinks, and I think there will be a more focus on that. I mean, even in pre-COVID, you still got the obsession by many CEOs and officials at clubs of, well, how many away fans are they going to bring? That was always the thing that you would hear, and you'd heard that from fans as well. And I think there'll be more emphasis on that now, given where we are and given where all our individual businesses are.
We joke about Leeds crisis, but Toronto actually are in a real crisis here. And Phil, perhaps suggesting the sport is, John. I look at Australia and I have no emotional attachment to anything. So I know when clubs have merged, it just seems to happen. Obviously, I'm sure the fans hate it. And, we've tried it over here and it never got off the first page. The mergers we did have were shams. The Huddersfield, Sheffield and the Gateshead Hull mergers were just there to keep afloat one of those two clubs. I'm not going to suggest mergers, but do we need to have a real discussion now? And this might be unpalatable to many, but it might be the only way forward. That we've got to acknowledge that there are clubs outside Super League who are never going to be Super League clubs for whatever reason. Dual Reg is it in a nutshell. Should we really now have a system of feeder clubs which strengthens those clubs outside Super League and the clubs inside the competition as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was obviously that opportunity in the mid-90s that went, and the sort of status quo has been maintained. And we've probably, well, I wouldn't say we've got less money in the game, but there's 37 professional clubs and there's not really enough fans or money to go around to sustain that. And if you think, there was maybe half that, there'd be a lot stronger level of competition, which would then help the national team, you would think. Because I think, as I mentioned on last week's show, there's players in League One who are on a lot more money than players in Super League, and that's not really how it should work as a business model. So yeah, I do think we need a serious debate, a discussion about that, but I don't think it will happen because that would require serious, strong leadership and accountability, and we don't generally see that. And we haven't learned from our mistakes in the past, as we've already mentioned. And that is that old sort of saying, isn't it, that if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Sorry, Paul.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think a problem we have was something I think I mentioned last time I was on here, that of the Championship being such a complex league in terms of there's a division within the Championship of what those clubs feel that they are about, and in terms on the lines of ambitions, you've got a handful of clubs there who genuinely feel like they should be in Super League or could be in Super League and want to be in Super League, and then you have another half who actually, that's not really on their radar. They're just businesses who accept what they are, whatever their fans might think, and that's a problem that we have and are going to have to solve. If you address that situation that you mentioned, Richard, I don't think we're going to do that. I think we've had that debate. We had licensing, which seems to be what you were proposing there. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but many other people were never sold on it. The criticism is always, it wasn't done well, which is true, but also many people were opposed anyway. So I don't see us going down that route anytime soon. People are so tired of debates about structure and the formats of the divisions. I don't know. Maybe it will come back. Maybe it's rugby league, isn't it? # Pete Rugby League. That's what we do, right? Talk about structures and how we should formulate the leagues and whether we should have relegation or not, rather than actually what happens on the pitch. I don't know, mate. I don't know what the solution is there. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There are many clubs in the Championship who would suit a sort of feeder status, but will they accept that as clubs? Will they accept that as supporter bases? Is the only thing that keeps them going the fact that the dream is alive? Or if the dream wasn't alive, would it still be an important community asset that people supported? I don't know. People have different views on that, I think.
I think it's also about identity. Whether we like it or not, in the professional era of sport, the only sports that are going to command huge amounts of money, which is based on eyeballs, are global sports. So football is number one, probably Formula One is number two, basketball is number three. And at the moment, they are the only three. I think outside of that, you've got sports like the AFL that, you know, is happy in the geographical area it plays in. You've got sports like rugby union that aren't as developed as a global sport as they would like us to think that they are. And we need to decide what we want to be. If we want to join that division of globally viewed sports, we need to make some decisions that will change the way the sport has been traditionally run and looked over 125 years. If we're not, and there's nothing wrong with being the best we can be in two parts of the world, one of which will be always a full-time sport, the other will be a mix of full-time and part-time, then we have to accept that we won't be commanding the kind of monies that Sky have been spending on sports such as ours. We will revert to being more of a speedway. We will be limited in the power of sponsorship that we can access and the number of external investors that will perhaps want to put money into our sport. And therefore, our profile will diminish. Our players will be part-time predominantly. They will still be a rugby league. It won't die. It's too ingrained in too many places. It still is a great watch. But we have an identity crisis. We don't know what we want to be. We want the riches that go with being deemed to be global, which is what Toronto gave us. We want the intimacy and control of being 30 clubs within a 80-mile radius. You cannot be both. Unfortunately, the world has moved on, whether we like it or not. What sustained our clubs in terms of industry and all the other social networks that go with it are no longer there. And we've put off this debate for too long. We can either be Scottish football with two really big clubs and a lot of ones who do good work in small towns and villages, but will never match the Celtic and the Rangers, or we can try and break new markets, but we can't be both.
Before I get on to, I think, the final things, is there anything glaring I've missed in this whole Toronto / the future of rugby league discussion we've had over the last 60 minutes or so? Silence. That's good. That's good.
You've been comprehensive.
Oh, that's good because nothing's written down.
Either that, I haven't been listening to you.
Everyone's switched off at this. They've all got to listen to whichever other rugby league podcasts are all coming out tonight because everyone's going to do a special now.
Yeah, listen to 6 to Go, by the way, if you haven't already. Just get that.
Fire the balls, yeah.
Just what Phil was saying, I think he's spot on, and we need some hard truths and some acceptance of where we are and what the future is, because I think that's part of the issue. There's a lot of people who don't want to accept the truth or who can't handle it. They live in a bit of a dreamland, and that doesn't help the sport and the attitude of some of the people running it.
But how many columns you've written in the last 12 months, John, which pretty much say that, and I've read and agreed with and liked on
right.
on Patreon.
Yeah, well, that's just my opinion, but I've followed the sport since birth. In 2 countries and worked in the UK for at least 7 years, covering Super League and the national team, etc. And I'm not the only person who says it, but yeah, it's part of our DNA, I guess. But yeah, some things are definitely avoidable, which we seem to be tripping up on. And Phil said it a lot more articulately than I did.
The problem is the mixed messaging, though, isn't it? I think it's that lack of clarity about what we want to be, and you do sense from a lot of clubs in Super League that actually, and not just Super League, outside Super League, that they would like a focus on the more traditional aspects of rugby league, and being the best that we can be, as Phil put it. But at the same time, the Super League is also selling itself as vibrant and going to this new market, and all the catchphrases that we've had in Robert Elston's time, and about being younger, and sexy rugby league, and Toronto fits into that. So what are we putting above the other thing? What are we prioritizing there? I don't know. It's all mixed messaging, and again, if you wanna concentrate on your heartlands and be the best that you can be, that's absolutely fine. I'm not saying that's wrong, but let's be honest about it, and let's go with that rather than pretending that you're something else. And ultimately, the Super League clubs are going to have to make that decision, because they're the ones in charge of the game now.
Which again is where part of the fault lies, that you cannot be the turkey that votes for Christmas. But I think the other thing as well that we've all seen, whether it's in Australia or here, is development costs a lot of money. There has to be a willingness that something comes out of a budget somewhere if you want to fund a new market. And whether that's rugby league, whether it's printing, whatever it might be, if you want to develop your product in an unfamiliar area, there is a cost attached to that. John mentioned it with Melbourne. That's a classic example. I'm not sure we have ever looked at expansion and new markets and thought the cost is not just pounds, but it's actually dispensations to make sure that those markets are given the time to breathe. And as a sport, we've never done that. We've said, if you want to come in, you want to be part of our party, you stand all the cost. You take all the risk. That to me is not development. And if we are serious about finding new investors, finding new markets, finding new television deals, finding new players, because let's face it, that's another area that we what we don't know is if Toronto had success in Super League over a sustained period of time, how many Canadian kids would have picked up a rugby ball, and who may have become part of our sport, who may have developed that side of a new market. But along with cost goes time. And the one thing we as a sport significantly do not give new projects is time. And if this ends after 3 years, it will be the latest in a long line of scandals. And people will look at rugby league and go, yeah, there's corporate people out there at the moment who are looking to invest in sport. I think we mentioned this the last time we were on a podcast. We've certainly written about it in 4020. There are companies out there who are corporate investors who are looking at getting a return on sport now. They don't care what it is. They don't care if it's, motorized ice hockey. They don't care if it's underwater goat racing. They don't care if it's rugby league. But what it is there. I'm going to patent that. I think there are people out there who have access to funds that need to know that the sport they're investing in is credible. And I think if we lose Toronto at this time, we will not be seen as a credible investment. We were just getting to the point, which again, I think John was talking about when he was last on, that there are people now in Australia that can see that expansion needs to be on an agenda. They're not going to agree necessarily with who is in charge of that expansion and how we do it, but they've realised that however strong their market is on the eastern seaboard of Australia, it's not enough. They're looking at Pacific areas. They're looking at Asian areas whereby there is significant interest, if we can get it right, in the product that we've got to propose them. They were convinced that there was a willingness and an ability in this part of the world to maybe crack that in America and in Canada as well. If we lose that now at this point where investment is out there, we will not get it back. This is far more important than whether Toronto paid their bills or not. This is a debate about what rugby league wants to and can and should be going forward.
If they can show ultimate frisbee on free sports, I'm sure underwater goat racing is possibly something which is on their channel and probably would get more viewers than League One Rugby League, sadly. But
who wouldn't love a goat in a snorkel?
I mean, who knows? I mean, positivity.
If things keep going the way they are in rugby league, I might be getting a job in journalism in underwater goat racing. I think there might be some opportunities there. Who knows?
The editor of
Underwater Goat Racing Weekly.
We have delusions of grandeur about what we are and what we can be, and you've got to make that happen. You cannot expect people to come in and recognise how good you are and invest in you without the foresight that we are a sport that wants to go places. If we don't, then get off the bandwagon that we deserve more column inches, because actually we don't.
Positive news, the World Cup schedule is out on Tuesday.
Tomorrow morning.
So there you go. So we'll look forward to that. And
undermined by this news today, I suspect.
Well, Prince Harry might turn up or something. I don't know. He might have the fixtures. He might be on a wall chart somewhere. Before we close off, 2 women making an impact on rugby league last week, and of course, hopefully, the Women's Super League will be back soon. Although I'm not sure I'm going to buy into the Keithley Loving with Carol Baskin, because I don't think anyone knows what is that bothered. She's just getting paid to read something. That's not a great celebrity endorsement, as much as people might go, "Oh, we've gone viral." Well, yeah.
I recorded a message for Rolf Harris as well.
Yeah.
This week, so but it might not be the best route to promote yourself. I don't know.
No, and some other fella from Leeds.
So yeah, we won't mention that.
No. I forget, of course, Leeds, of course, Phil's home, and now a Premier League football city, so obviously no one will care about the Rhinos now.
They get promoted, have they?
Apparently, yeah.
They've been promoted?
Yeah.
Oh, no one told me. No,
I don't think they've had any points deducted this week, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that is. It's very subject.
But I mean, there has been some chat about whether that is good or bad for rugby league, and actually, it's just great for sport in a city. And I think if sports are clever enough to feed off each other, then it is good. I think it raises another question, and that is when we start our sport in January and finish in October, then we are competing with other sports that are much bigger than us. This is another classic example. Whereas if those two sports dovetailed a little more, there would be a spillover. And in 2004 to 7, it happened. Both clubs were, happily coexisting, and certainly in the Rhinos' case, they were picking up fans. But
that was a pretty bad period for Leeds United, that Phil.
Uncle Ken, God bless.
They were relegated.
Speaking of cooperation and coexistence, and Paul's a perfect man to ask about this, of course. We mentioned it on the programme last week. Now, I was always under the assumption that Wigan Athletic and Wigan Warriors fans hated each other for whatever reason, probably because the Warriors were successful once upon a time and Wigan Athletic weren't. But now they might be one and the same thing once again.
Yeah, Sporting Club Wigan, perhaps. Speaking as a Wigan Athletic fan, I would say that right now. Yeah, that would be an excellent solution, I think. The hate thing is a strange thing. It depends who you speak to and who the fans are. There are, elements of both fan bases who aren't keen on the other. You get a lot of it actually on the Wigan Athletic side goes back to something that Maurice Lindsay once said on TV. You can blame him for that. I think he described Latics as a smashing little club. In his own inimitable style, and basically said that they'll never amount to nothing in not so many words. This is a rugby town. But I have friends who support both quite happily. For those people, for me, it would be a very good partnership. I'd be delighted to see that happen. Fingers crossed. Who knows what's going to happen? We thought we might still be in the championship until the 92nd minute on Saturday, and now it looks like maybe not. We'll find out on Wednesday. But yeah, I'd like to see it. I don't know where they get the money from. Obviously, there's going to be more than just Ian Lenigan involved if you're going to take over a Championship football club or a League One football club, as we might be. But yeah, hopefully good news on the horizon. I mean, they have a similar setup at Doncaster, albeit with all due respect, a much smaller rugby league venture. I'd like to see it happen. Fingers crossed.
Springfield Borough, bring them back. That's what we're saying. Someone sent me a very offensive message on WhatsApp there. I'm disgusted by that.
Sorry, Rich. Apologies.
No. We should end with the other positive rugby league story of the week. Not that this is a positive rugby league podcast. Pessimistic rugby league is a new one we're going for. But everyone loves Claire Balding. She's great. She loves rugby league. She's the new president of the RFL, which people keep forgetting has no power whatsoever. She gets to. I should say, because this is a facetious rugby league podcast. I joked for the last 12 months that they'll have to prize those chains from Carl Hall's cold dead hands. And he's got his hands on them for another 6 months. What's going on there? But Claire Balding, it's only a joke. Claire Balding is the new president of the Rugby Football League, and she says that we should spend more time promoting women's rugby league because it's the future. Claire, you should have been watching this program. But she's going to be another good person in that role as Tony Adams was before.
Yeah. Oh, what I want to know is she going to resign for overseeing Toronto Wolfpack dropping out of the Super League? It's been an absolute
her fault.
Sit out.
But one less club since she took over. How is that a measure of success?
Yeah, exactly. It's Balding out. Balding, by the way, is a sore subject, so I probably shouldn't go on about that myself.
Toronto Cap.
I think it's great. I think she's a really good ambassador for our sport. I mean, everybody during the time that she was in charge of rugby league on the BBC, or in control on the screen of rugby league on the BBC, really warmed to Claire Balding, didn't they? Because we saw the actual genuine affection that she had for the sport. I think it's great. I hope she enjoys the role. It's great to hear her talk about the Women's Rugby League. It's possibly a shame that it has to be a woman that is a president to get someone to talk about making Women's Rugby League more important. Maybe that could have been done by many past presidents. But yeah, that might be a special focus for her. Great. I think, I think we all welcome her. I don't think anyone within Rugby League has anything negative to say about Claire Balding today. I mean, maybe John does.
No, not at all. No, good choice as president. No more ex-Arsenal players.
I think she's a potential breath of fresh air, but again, she's got this vision about what rugby league could be. So she sees the women and diversity angle as pushing the sport forward. She sees new sponsors being perhaps brought in on the back of that. She sees even new geographical areas and schools opening up to the idea of rugby league. I think she even spoke in an interview about maybe getting a company like Apple involved, which I don't think she had the phone number of the chief executive at Apple, but she thinks we've got something to sell. She likes the idea of we're an innovative, forward-looking sport. That's what saddens me about the Toronto news, that one of the legs that she was standing on has been unceremoniously kicked away from her. So, what do we want as a sport? It's all part of the same thing. Do we want to make a greater offer? Do we want to be accessible to all? Do we want to be played in as many places as we can because we genuinely think we've got a product that appeals to everybody? Or are we stuck in our ways and our geographical places? And as we've said, let's not be averse to that if that's what we are. But I use an analogy that my good friend Tony Hannon often rolls out. Country music is specific to a certain part of America, but it doesn't stop it being popular everywhere in the world. They didn't put an embargo on where it could be played and listened to. It was good enough to make its way and is accepted wherever a disc by Kenny Rogers is spun. And we should adopt the same attitude.
Rugby league as country music.
There's a segment in that. Next week, there's a show in that.
I think there's a link with when it comes to expansion, and we are Kenny Rogers the gambler because we like to gamble on it.
We like to hold them, and unfortunately, it seems that today Toronto Wolfpack have folded them.
I'm surprised actually, John, because you didn't get my Walker Brothers reference on 6 to Go this week, but you have at least come up trumps with some country music there. So well done.
I've got no idea what you're talking
You still don't know what I was on about, do you?
I know the ones who played for Brisbane and Manly, and I think one played for Leeds. And they
he was great.
Yeah.
I've mentioned this before. Was he one of Leeds' worst signings in Super League, Phil Ben Walker?
He had very difficult shoes to fill in taking over from Yestin Harris, that's for sure. But to follow the Walker Brothers theme, I just hope that there are no regrets when we...
That was my joke, Phil. That was my joke I didn't get.
What did you say?
I said, will they have no regrets if they appoint them?
Yes,
this is for you, John. Look at that. The Walker Brothers, no regrets on vinyl.
Wow, just evidence that you've got absolutely no musical taste whatsoever, Paul. That's great.
You're a disgrace.
Bring back both of
He
them.
comes from the land of the Wigan Casino. Of course he's got musical taste.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but they put pies in bread and call it a kebab, so it all balances itself out eventually.
And
I think that's where we should leave this, because we've amazingly done over 80 minutes this week, which will really please some people. And we'll have to come back again next week because obviously Super League's back for the big double header, maybe triple header. Poor Super League.
Don't worry, I'm looking forward to Hull KR against Featherstone to reopen the Super League.
Well, Brett Ferris has signed on for another year, so he'll be well up for it.
talk about quick into someone's grave, you know.
In decent haste, unseemly, perhaps some might say.
Oh, don't upset all the Fev fans. They already don't like us already. You know, they all hate Leeds. I mean, we know that. And Cass, and Wakefield, and I don't know. Does anyone in Featherstone like anyone? I like Peter Fox. But apart from that, no. This is why we should only have stopped at 80 minutes, because I'm just completely. I should have ended at that line about Toronto phone them. To be honest, it's all been downhill after that. But anyway, Paul, thank you very much for joining us. When's League Weekly back?
Good question.
Some point in the future.
The Toronto special.
I've yet to get the call, so right. I'm gonna say probably not next Monday, but I don't know. Certainly the Monday after. I'd love to be able to tell you.
I'd love a 6:30 Sunday match start as well.
If I get a call on Saturday saying, "Yeah, we're gonna have a paper on Monday," then I'll panic. But
League style, that is great planning.
It is very rugby league. Yeah, we like to characterise the sport that we cover.
I mean, John, what are you going to write about this week? Because you can't annoy all the Toronto fans, or some of them.
I'll just have to invent some more dog whistle journalism. I don't know where it would happen, but yeah, I mean, that was a joke, obviously.
John is always finding new and innovative ways to annoy people, so I'm sure it'll be fine.
My job and report facts. How dare I?
I mean, we all upset various different people. Phil managed to upset people who knew before the last 2 weeks that there was a massive group of people involved in rugby league actively looking to lionize, almost canonize Harry Sunderland, the person who probably not many people know much about at all, until someone decided, oh, maybe they should change the name of an award that's named after him. That, yeah. I do love the insinuation that players, it wouldn't be the same if it didn't have his name attached to it, as if the players care.
I think we should all be very, feel bad for Phil, because he's a Brisbane Broncos fan, and
and they're rubbish again.
Worst team in the history of rugby league. So poor Phil.
But at least they haven't sacked their coach yet.
Is that a good thing, though? Is that a good thing?
Phil, you will not win 5 games in the next 10. You will not.
Everything goes in cycles.
Yeah, unfortunately, as I've said a million times, I'm still waiting for that Wakefield cycle to get back to the top. It gets near there and it jars and goes back a bit. But one day, maybe this year with no one at Wembley will win the Challenge Cup. It'd be apt, wouldn't it? Until we lose to Featherstone, who signed all the Toronto players. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, John. Phil, thank you very much as ever. Thank you very much for watching or listening. We will be back probably next week to preview Super League and put in all our predictions for the 2/3 games that will be here as we return with another action-packed edition of 4020, not live.